In federal prison, it seemed like there was kind of an unwritten rule that it wasn't really such a good idea to stand out too much, especially if the ways you stood out had anything to do with being happy. I remember once one of the guys in my unit looked at me, kind of rolled his eyes. I don't remember what I was doing, but kind of rolled his eyes and he said, "Damn, Parker, I never seen anybody be so damn happy about being in prison." And I knew this wasn't a compliment. So imagine my surprise when I first met Francisco Crespo. I had just been in prison for a few days. I had just arrived and I was still finding my way around. And one afternoon I went out to walk the track in the rec yard. And as I was walking, this man came up behind me. I heard him running up behind me. And he was running not like inmates run. He wasn't grim. He wasn't tough. He was light on his feet. He had his hands up in the air. There was a bank right beside the track, a grassy bank, and he ran up the bank and he threw his hands up in the air and he spun in a circle and he, without missing a beat, ran back down on the track and kept going. And there was nothing arrogant about him. There was nothing weird about him. It was just, the guy looked like he was dancing with angels. I didn't say anything to him. He was obviously in his own world, but it was a different kind of world than anybody else that I'd met so far was in that prison. After I'd seen him a few times, I sat down with him, or I stopped him once in the dining hall and I said, "Man, I love how you run." And he just laughed and he said, "Oh yeah? You don't think I'm crazy?" And I said, "No, man, I don't think you're crazy. I think it's beautiful. I think I better get to know you." And so we did. We got to know each other. And his name was Francisco Crespo, but everybody called him Frankie. And I do mean everyone, because everybody loved Frankie, even in a place where there were all this nastiness and gangs and infighting and stress between different ethnic groups. Everybody loved Frankie. I learned from talking to him that he had grown up in Puerto Rico and lived on his grandfather's farm, and he talked about, it was in the mountains of Puerto Rico, and he talked about loving the land and loving the work and loving his grandfather and loving life. And then he came at some point in his life. It's interesting. I don't remember, I don't get all the details of the stories of many of the men that I spent time with, but I know he came to New York and he started falling into a rough life. And I don't know all the details, but I know he did some pretty high-end robberies. I think of jewelry stores, banks, and just got himself in trouble and wound up like all the rest of us in Raybrook Federal Correctional Institution. And somehow, while he was there, somehow the process of being in prison stopped him in some similar way that it stopped me. And I don't know what happened, but he had some kind of, I don't like the word awakening because it's so misused these days, but he had some kind of waking up that happened to him in which he saw something deeper about life, something deeper about who he was. And man, it changed him. And everybody could see it. He would run. When he ran around the yard and he put his hands up. He's looking at the pine trees all around the yard, looking up at the sky. I can't remember if he sang, but he was singing on his feet. He was just music. He was dancing with angels. And he wasn't just off in the clouds. He was very, very committed to helping his homies. You know, he spoke good English himself. Of course, Spanish was his native language in Puerto Rico, but he spoke good English, and he spent all kinds of time in education, both doing his own reading and tutoring, teaching classes and tutoring people in English, reading and writing. And he started a whole program to help people who were leaving prison and to help them with their transition back to the community. And one of the things I remember most about him, he had this class. I don't remember what it was called, but it was some sort of class that really touched on spiritual, kind of his spiritual awakening. And here was this guy. He was a bull of a guy. He wasn't tall, but he was built. He was strong. He ran. He was light on his feet, but he was built like a fullback. And here he was teaching this class about spiritual principles to a bunch of inmates, including me. And he'd talk about chakras and energy and kundalini and just all these things. I don't even remember what he said. And it was kind of hard to understand. And I don't think any of us in the class really knew what the hell he was talking about. But man, you could tell that whatever it was that Frankie had, it was real, because he was so full of joy, and he communicated that joy. And we would sit in that class for 2 hours. And people would be listening to him and probably not understanding a word that he was saying, but still taking in the energy of somebody that had that kind of joy. And here he was in a federal prison, willing to run around and dance and do stuff. Nobody did this on this compound. And he would throw his hands in the air and look up at the trees, and he wasn't making a show of it. He just was in love with life, and the joy in him was real, and everybody could see it. And I was so grateful to him, because every time I saw him, we would say, like I talked about with my friend Bird, we would yell out to each other across the dining hall. He was in the medium security units up on the hill, and I was in the minimum security unit down at the bottom. So we weren't in the same unit, but we would sit and talk in the library, in the education center, or we'd walk the track when he wasn't running the track. And he was just so filled with joy. He'd come into the cafeteria and he'd say, "Hey, yo, Parker," and I'd say, "Frankie," and just his presence, the way he moved, the way he related to everyone. When he talked to everybody in the same way. He would look them in the eye. He was intent. He was attentive. He cared. He helped them. And it wasn't a program. It wasn't a mission. It was just who Frankie was. And I was so grateful to him, because that one guy on that compound, I never really thought about it when I was there, but one guy, just in his energy, in his joy, in his unapologetic effusiveness about life, made it safer for me to be myself there as well. I've never forgotten him. He transferred to a prison somewhere down south to be closer to his family. But I always think about him when, these days there's so many people in this kind of angst about whether who we are matters, or whether there's anything we can do in life, or whether we have any impact, or just whether our life has any meaning. And here was Frankie, not trying to have meaning, but just living it. And I swear there were close to 1,000 men in this prison. And I swear he changed the tone of that whole prison just by his own energy, by his own heartfulness, by his own joy. It was so unexpected for me to find that true joy in a place like prison. And I was so grateful to him, and I've never forgotten it. Frankie, I don't know where you have landed. I don't know if you're still in or if you're out, but I love you, man. Thank you so much for being who you are, for giving me and so many other people the permission to show the heart, even in a place like prison. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate you coming to watch these videos. If you like them, I want to thank you. So many people have commented on these recent videos. I really appreciate it. It matters to me to hear from you and to be able to share these stories that were so personal and that really never come into the outside world. So thank you for listening. Thank you for your interest. And if you like this, please do like and subscribe. That's the one thing I ask. It's a way to support this channel, and it's a way to put these stories in front of people who might not otherwise see them. Hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much for coming.